A black stone stele stood silently within the membrane of light, its presence resembling a dormant, ancient beast. An intangible yet terrifying aura spread intermittently from it, stirring the air with an oppressive atmosphere. The 4 steles were exceptionally grand, far larger than those Lin Dong had previously seen in the martial arts hall, and the fluctuations they emitted were of a far higher level. These 4 steles hold some of the most powerful martial arts of the Wild Hall, second only to the great wilderness scripture, said the blind old man, his hands behind his back, his gray-white eyes gazing at the steles. His voice was calm but carried weight. These martial arts are not for ordinary disciples to practice. Currently, within the Wild Hall, only the 4 direct disciples have managed to cultivate the martial arts on the first stele. As for the other 3, no one has succeeded yet. Lin Dong was somewhat taken aback. The Wild Hall had its share of talented individuals, yet only 4 had managed to master one of the 4 martial arts. Do these 4 martial arts vary in difficulty? Lin Dong asked suddenly. If we must differentiate, the martial art on the first stele is relatively easier to cultivate. The second is a bit harder, and the third and fourth are the strongest, virtually equal in difficulty, the blind old man explained. In the past, Zhou Tong trained in the martial art of the third stele, but he didn't succeed in cultivating the one on the fourth when he first came here. Oh! Lin Dong was slightly moved. Could the martial art on the fourth stele be so formidable that even Zhou Tong had failed to master it? It wasn't that his talent was lacking. It's just that the martial art on the fourth stele has some peculiar requirements for the practitioner, the blind old man added, pausing briefly and casting an extra glance at Lin Dong before continuing. It requires both primordial energy and spiritual energy, and neither can be lacking. Lin Dong's heart skipped a beat. Was the old man hinting at him? Take a look for yourself and choose one to cultivate, the blind old man said, waving his hand dismissively. Yes, sir. Lin Dong respectfully acknowledged, stepping forward quickly to inspect the first stele. It was jet black, as if forged from iron, and on its surface were 4 ancient characters, etched with sharp strokes. Great Star Gang Fist. Lin Dong stared at the ancient text, feeling an overwhelming, ferocious energy radiating from it. This martial art clearly belonged to the most forceful and aggressive type. So this is what Jiang Hao and the others are practicing. Lin Dong's eyes flickered with thought as he contemplated before moving on to the second stele. Carved into the second stele was a long, dark sword. Black mist swirled around the sword, exuding a chilling aura that made even Lin Dong's skin tingle. Great Dark Corrosion Sword. These simple 4 characters seemed to emanate coldness. This martial art was different from the sheer aggression of the Great Star Gang Fist, but its chilling coldness felt inescapable, like a shadow lingering on the bones. Lin Dong contemplated for a long moment before shaking his head. This martial art was too cold and didn't suit him. Without hesitation, he moved on to the third stele. The third stele was more unadorned than the first 2. It was a dark gray in color, and on its surface was an image of a figure sitting cross-legged. The figure's body appeared dry and cracked, like parched earth, but from this desolation, there was an underlying sense of immense power. Lin Dong's gaze lingered on the figure before looking up at the ancient characters above it. Great Wild Script. The name was simple and unpretentious, yet it carried a sense of vastness and grandeur. So this is the martial art that Zhou Tong chose? Lin Dong muttered to himself, his brows furrowing slightly. The Great Wild Script appeared to be a body-refining martial art, and for someone like Lin Dong, who had already committed to cultivating the sky-transforming dragon art, this presented a conflict. His current training in the sky-transforming dragon art already demanded considerable energy, and splitting his focus on another body-refining technique might hinder both efforts. From the blind old man's words, Lin Dong knew that the Great Wild Script was one of the top martial arts here, with only the martial art on the fourth stele able to rival it. But Lin Dong already had the sky-transforming dragon art. He stood before the stele, hesitating for a long time, before finally shaking his head and resolutely walking away. As powerful as the Great Wild Script was, he chose to stay with what he was already familiar with, the sky-transforming dragon art. The blind old man, watching from a distance, twitched slightly at this scene. His gray-white eyes closely followed Lin Dong's steps. Click. Lin Dong's footsteps stopped in front of the last stele. He took a deep breath, then raised his head to examine it. There were no characters on the surface of this stele. Instead, there was a massive black eye, etched deeply into the dark stone. Lin Dong stared at the black eye, and for a moment, it seemed as though the eye was staring back at him. The eerie sensation caused his skin to prickle. This martial art felt strange. Despite the strangeness, Lin Dong steeled himself and continued to gaze into the black eye. Time seemed to stand still, and after a few minutes, Lin Dong suddenly noticed the eye blink. The discovery made Lin Dong's scalp tingle, but before he could react, a thin beam of black light shot from the eye, piercing into his own. Startled, Lin Dong instinctively circulated his primordial energy. However, he quickly realized that the black light wasn't harmful. Instead, it carried information that flowed into his mind. An ancient exotic beast, known as the Wild, possessed a single eye. When open, it would bring desolation to the land, eroding life like the passing of time. Segments of ancient knowledge flashed through Lin Dong's mind, giving him insight into this martial art. According to the information, the martial art on the stele was called the Wild Demon Eye, and it mimicked the abilities of the ancient wild beast. While Lin Dong wasn't sure if mastering this technique would truly allow him to bring desolation to the land, it was clear that this was an incredibly ferocious martial art. However, there were no details on how to cultivate the Wild Demon Eye, suggesting that the requirements for its practice were extraordinarily high. Standing before the stele, Lin Dong gazed intently at the black eye, his heart wavering. The Wild Demon Eye was extremely dangerous, and even Lin Dong wasn't confident that he could master it. Failing to do so would waste significant time and effort. The blind old man watched Lin Dong in silence, unsure which martial art Lin Dong would ultimately choose. The tense and oppressive atmosphere lingered for nearly half an hour, and then, the blind old man saw Lin Dong step back. Has he given up on it? Seeing this, the blind old man's gray-white eyes lowered slightly. For some reason, there was a hint of disappointment in his expression. His withered hand gently brushed over his eyes. Tap. Just as the old man was feeling disappointed, he suddenly heard the sound of someone sitting down. He looked up in surprise and saw that Lin Dong had already sat cross-legged in front of the stone stele. "Senior, I choose this martial art." Lin Dong's voice reached the blind old man's ears. Hearing this, the blind old man remained silent for a moment before his hoarse voice broke the quiet. "There is risk in practicing this martial art. If something goes wrong, your eyes may end up like mine." Lin Dong's heart skipped a beat. From the old man's words, it seemed that he, too, had once practiced the Wild Demon Eye and had failed. In this world, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Lin Dong took a deep breath. He had known from the beginning that every reward required a price. With that thought, Lin Dong slowly closed his eyes, while the blind old man watched, his expression complex. Lin Dong sat quietly in front of the black stone stele, his eyes shut, gradually suppressing the primordial energy fluctuations within his body. Not far behind him, the blind old man observed in silence, his aged face growing calm. He, too, had once attempted to cultivate the Wild Demon Eye, but due to an unforeseen accident, he had lost his sight, a heavy price to pay. It was unexpected for Lin Dong to choose this high-risk martial art. Even Zhou Tong, that brash fellow, had hesitated before ultimately giving up the Wild Demon Eye in favor of the Great Wild Script. Though neither martial art was definitively stronger than the other, the blind old man knew they had fundamental differences. The Great Wild Script enhanced the physical body, overall improving one's combat power, while the Wild Demon Eye was a pure killing technique. In terms of lethality, the latter was undoubtedly more powerful. Of course, it wasn't that Zhou Tong lacked talent. Rather, the requirements for cultivating the Wild Demon Eye didn't suit him. Given his temperament, it was no surprise that he had chosen the Great Wild Script. Whether or not you succeed will depend on your own fortune. Don't worry, our Wild Hall rarely produces someone comparable to that fellow from the past. "I won't let you end up like me," the blind old man murmured with a sigh, his gaze fixed on Lin Dong's back. He knew that Dust Truth had high hopes for Lin Dong. If Lin Dong were to lose his sight while training in the martial arts hall, those two old men would undoubtedly fly into a rage. After speaking, the old man sat down cross-legged. He could sense that although Lin Dong's body remained motionless, strands of spiritual energy were emanating from his Naiwan palace, intertwining with the black eye on the stone stele. Seal Heavenly Talisman Master. The blind old man barely had to concentrate before he could sense Lin Dong's spiritual energy cultivation. He nodded slightly. Lin Dong's primordial energy and spiritual energy, while not particularly outstanding on their own, were quite remarkable when combined. As the blind old man settled into silence, the membrane of light surrounding them once again became quiet. Lin Dong's body trembled slightly as an intense surge of spiritual energy suddenly shot out from his Naiwan palace, plunging into the black eye on the stone stele. Zing! The moment Lin Dong's spiritual energy entered the black eye, his mind grew momentarily dazed, and then he felt his surroundings begin to shift dramatically. When he finally steadied his thoughts, he realized he was standing on a vast and desolate plain. The ground stretched out endlessly before him, a flat plain extending to the horizon, where the sky and earth seemed to meet. A wild, ancient aura filled the air, as if he had stepped into a land from ages long past. Standing on this endless plain, Lin Dong gazed up at the sky, feeling a deep sense of insignificance. The overwhelming helplessness rose from deep within, spreading throughout his body, rendering him immobile. Who? Lin Dong exhaled deeply, but his eyes suddenly sharpened. His back straightened like a spear as he forcibly suppressed that feeling of smallness. He knew this place must be the mental space connected to the stone stele. The battle here may not involve physical bloodshed, but it carried its own fierce challenges. A mental clash could leave indelible marks on one's spirit, which would hinder future cultivation. Suppressing the sense of helplessness within him, Lin Dong took a step forward. As his foot touched the soft ground, that ancient, desolate aura seemed to seep through his soles and into his body. Thud. At that moment, the earth began to shake violently. Waves of visible ripples spread across the vast plain, pulsing outward like waves in the water, quickly covering the land. Lin Dong watched calmly, his eyes steady. In the distance, the ground suddenly split open with a thunderous crack, and the fissure rapidly expanded, reaching a width of thousands of meters in just moments. It looked like an endless abyss. Howl! From the depths of the abyss, a strange and massive howl echoed through the sky, and invisible sound waves swept across the heavens, whipping up a terrifying storm. Lin Dong's pupils contracted slightly as he stared at the source of the sound. In the darkness, he faintly saw a colossal shadow moving. His gaze remained fixed on the abyss, and in the next instant, his pupils shrank dramatically. Boom! As Lin Dong's eyes narrowed, a massive cloud of dust erupted from the abyss, and a shadow, so enormous it was beyond comprehension, shot into the sky like a land dragon. The gigantic form blotted out the sky and sun. Lin Dong stared at the behemoth rising from the abyss, involuntarily sucking in a breath of cold air. The creature's body was serpentine, stretching thousands of meters long, its scales black as iron. An overwhelming, icy killing aura swept through the air like a storm. The most terrifying feature, however, wasn't the beast's enormous, fanged mouth. It was the massive black eye set in the middle of its forehead. The eye was closed, but just seeing it made every hair on Lin Dong's body stand on end. This is the wild? Lin Dong whispered softly. If his guess was correct, this monstrous beast before him was the fabled wild. The overwhelming power displayed by the massive beast in the sky left Lin Dong with no doubts. This exotic beast truly possessed the terrifying ability to turn thousands of miles into desolation. The wild soared through the sky, its massive body coiling through the clouds. Then, it slowly lowered its enormous head, staring down at Lin Dong, who appeared as insignificant as an ant on the ground. As soon as the beast's gaze fell on him, Lin Dong's expression turned grave. He could feel the ground beneath him withering at an alarming rate, rapidly drying and cracking. What terrifying wild force! Even though he knew this was a spiritual space and none of what he saw was real, Lin Dong still felt a tremendous pressure bearing down on him. The ground beneath him continued to decay, the desolation spreading at a speed visible to the naked eye. But Lin Dong remained calm. He took a deep breath and fixed his gaze on the colossal beast in the sky. In a situation like this, any wavering in his spirit would result in a swift defeat in this mental confrontation. Zing. However, Lin Dong's steady gaze seemed to agitate the wild, and he watched in alarm as its massive, closed eye began to slowly open. Buzz. As the giant eye opened, the energy in the surrounding space grew wild and chaotic. Even the heaven and earth energy seemed to flee from the area, as if in fear. The eye continued to open, revealing an endless dark gray void, as though no light could penetrate it. Cold sweat trickled down Lin Dong's back as he stared at the opening eye, and his scalp tingled. Whoosh! The giant eye fully opened, and in the blink of an eye, a beam of gray light, hundreds of feet wide, shot out from it. The gray light blasted across the land, causing the ground to immediately crack apart. The once vibrant scenery vanished completely, replaced by a lifeless wasteland. In an instant, everything within 1,000 miles became desolate. But Lin Dong had no time to worry about his surroundings. His attention was fixed on the massive beam of gray light, which was hurtling toward him at a terrifying speed. The beam moved so fast that it covered the sky in a single flash, and as it approached Lin Dong, its size shrank rapidly. By the time it reached his head, it had condensed into a thin thread no thicker than a thumb. Zing. The beam was filled with a terrifying power, but Lin Dong made no move to dodge. He knew that this was a trial he had to face. Come on, let me see just how powerful this wild demon eye really is. Lin Dong slowly opened his arms, his eyes filled with determination and defiance. The next moment, the gray beam shot directly into the center of his forehead. A wave of excruciating pain washed over Lin Dong, and his vision rapidly darkened, as though he had lost all sight. The faint membrane of light that enveloped the 4 massive stone steles created a suffocating atmosphere, the oppressive silence weighing heavily. However, of the 2 people within the light, one was deep in cultivation, while the other, the blind old man, was long accustomed to the oppressive stillness. As such, neither was particularly disturbed by the atmosphere. The blind old man sat motionless, holding his worn broom. His gray-white eyes were slightly lowered, his breathing so faint it was barely perceptible, making him appear no different from an old man on the brink of death. Zing. The silence persisted for almost half a day before Lin Dong, seated in front of the stone stele, suddenly trembled. At the same time, faint light began to emanate from the surface of the black stone stele. The moment the stele began to glow, the blind old man's head shot up, and in an instant, his figure moved. Without any noticeable motion, he appeared in front of Lin Dong, his expression suddenly serious as he stared intently at the young man's face. A dark gray aura swirled faintly around Lin Dong's face, slowly gathering at the center of his forehead. As it concentrated, a thin gray line appeared on his forehead, shifting and writhing like a small worm. So, he has seen the wild. The blind old man's gaze locked onto Lin Dong's face, his aged features tense. His withered fingers rubbed against each other nervously, revealing the deep disturbance in his normally calm heart. Under the old man's watchful eyes, the gray aura on Lin Dong's face grew thicker, and as it did, 2 lines of blood suddenly trickled from the corners of his eyes, looking like streaks of blood tears, a startling and eerie sight. Crack. Although blind, the old man could clearly sense the changes on Lin Dong's face. His expression shifted dramatically, and the broom in his hands shattered into dust. Having once practiced the wild demon eye, the old man was all too familiar with its risks. That strange energy could easily invade a person's eyes, and if it succeeded, the result would be blindness, just like him. The blind old man's face tightened, his withered hands clenching and unclenching repeatedly as he hesitated whether to pull Lin Dong out of the spiritual space. Zzz. In the moment of his hesitation, the strange gray aura on Lin Dong's face intensified. As the gray energy gathered, The line on his forehead thickened, while the blood streaks from the corners of his eyes grew more prominent, signaling that Lin Dong's vision was beginning to suffer from the invasion. Shuffle. The blind old man paced back and forth anxiously in front of Lin Dong, his steps uneven and frantic. After a few minutes of indecision, he finally gritted his teeth and turned around, his withered fingers moving like lightning as they darted toward the gray line on Lin Dong's forehead. If he could break it, he could pull Lin Dong out. His movements were swift, and in the blink of an eye, his fingers were inches from Lin Dong's forehead. However, just as they were about to make contact, a gentle white light suddenly shot out from Lin Dong's forehead, meeting the old man's hand. Zing! The two forces collided, but there was no explosion or energy wave. The white light merely blocked the old man's fingers for a brief moment before it faded away. Despite the white light's disappearance, the old man's hand stopped. His face was filled with astonishment. He doesn't need me to intervene? The old man paused in silence, realizing that the white light was likely an unconscious response from Lin Dong's subconscious. If that was the case, Lin Dong had no intention of giving up on cultivating the wild demon eye. Acknowledging this, the blind old man's face grew more wrinkled as his furrowed brow deepened. After a long moment, he let out a helpless sigh and shook his head. He had underestimated Lin Dong's determination to master the martial arts. But sometimes, this kind of resolve could be either a blessing or a curse. Let's wait and see for now, the blind old man murmured to himself. If something really goes wrong, I'll forcefully pull you out. You really are a worrisome kid. With that, he sat down next to Lin Dong, closely monitoring his every movement. As the old man continued to watch, he gradually let go of some of his concerns. Though the streaks of blood at the corners of Lin Dong's eyes persisted, at least they showed no signs of worsening. And so, what the old man thought would be a short wait turned into 5 full days. Throughout these 5 days, Lin Dong showed no sign of breaking out of his deep cultivation. The blood streaks at the corners of his eyes had solidified into 2 eerie blood clots, making him appear even more unusual. During this time, the gray aura on his face grew denser, without any sign of dissipating. This development left the blind old man increasingly puzzled. While the gray line between Lin Dong's brows continued to gather energy, it made no further movement. Based on the old man's experience, if Lin Dong were succeeding, the gray line should have started transforming into an eye by now. However, if Lin Dong were failing, his calm demeanor didn't align with that either. Even with his wealth of experience, the old man couldn't discern whether Lin Dong was on the brink of success or failure. It was frustratingly unclear. 5 days. It should be about time. Today is the monthly competition in the Wild Hall, and this kid is supposed to face off against Zhang Hao, isn't he? Still, sparring between juniors is not as important as cultivation. Oh well, let him continue. If he misses it, he misses it. The blind old man muttered to himself, clearly reluctant to interrupt Lin Dong's cultivation just for a competition. He didn't show any intention of waking Lin Dong up. Buzz. Buzz. Yet, the world often defies expectations. Just as the old man's murmurs faded, a low hum echoed from the stone stele. The next moment, he saw a dazzling gray light shoot out from the black eye on the stele, connecting directly with Lin Dong's brow, linking with the gray line there. The beam of light connected Lin Dong's brow to the stele, and as this connection formed, the flesh between Lin Dong's brows began to writhe. The gray line became even more pronounced, showing faint signs of cracking. A chilling, ominous energy started to seep out. Is it about to form an eye? The blind old man sat up straighter, his eyes fixed on the gray line between Lin Dong's brows. However, despite the continuous writhing of the gray line, it showed no further signs of splitting open. What's going on? The old man muttered, frowning deeply. While he was focused on the gray beam, he failed to notice a faint, gentle white light flashing briefly beneath it. The light connecting Lin Dong's brow to the stele gradually dimmed. After a brief moment, it let out a soft sound and completely dissipated. Just as the light vanished, Lin Dong's tightly shut eyes, which had been closed for 5 days, slowly opened. His gaze, as clear and calm as it had been 5 days earlier, scanned his surroundings. Though the blood clots at the corners of his eyes added an eerie touch, there was little difference between the Lin Dong of now and the one from 5 days ago. The blind old man was momentarily at a loss, staring in astonishment at Lin Dong's peaceful expression. He wasn't sure what to say. "Thank you, Senior, for guarding me during my cultivation," Lin Dong said, a smile quickly forming on his face as he stood up. He respectfully bowed to the old man. "It's nothing. If your cultivation is finished, go on. Today is the Wild Hall's monthly competition." The blind old man slowly stood up, waving his hand dismissively. Lin Dong nodded and turned to leave. But just as he was about to step out of the light barrier, the blind old man couldn't hold back any longer and called out, "Although I don't know if you've succeeded in cultivating the wild demon eye, I suggest you use it sparingly. This technique is rather sinister. Overuse could damage your eyes." Lin Dong paused for a moment, nodded slightly, and lightly touched the center of his brow. A faint smile curled his lips. During cultivation, he had indeed noticed the sinister nature of the wild demon eye, but with the mysterious stone talisman suppressing it, he wasn't too worried about it causing any real trouble. At the center of the mountain range of the Wild Hall stood an especially massive peak, piercing through the clouds, with mist swirling around it, exuding a sense of transcendence. This mountain housed the Wild Hall's main temple, making it the heart of the hall. Every month, the Wild Hall's monthly competition was held on this very peak. The monthly competition was a tradition in all 4 halls of the Dao sect. Essentially, it served as a way to assess the progress of the disciples' cultivation and motivate them to improve, thus strengthening the overall power of the hall. Additionally, during each competition, some of the more outstanding honorary disciples had the chance to be promoted to full disciples of the Wild Hall. Although the competition took place monthly, it was always a lively occasion. After all, this was the only day when those honorary disciples had the opportunity to enter the main temple. The Wild Hall had over 10,000 honorary disciples, 3,000 full disciples, and 300 direct disciples. Such a grand assembly naturally made for an impressive sight on this day, with the majority of disciples gathering in one place. At the summit of the mountain stood an imposing and ancient temple, towering silently amidst the clouds. Its vast and dignified presence radiated power. The temple's weathered, yellowish hue was the mark of time, giving it an air of unmatched stability. In front of the temple stretched an enormous stone plaza, meticulously designed with several tiers. By this time, the outskirts of the plaza were already packed with a dense crowd of people. Despite the large gathering, no noise could be heard. Over 10,000 disciples sat quietly in the plaza, their collective silence causing the heaven and earth energy in the area to ripple intensely. Near the center of the plaza sat the full disciples of the Wild Hall, while the honorary disciples on the outskirts watched them with envy in their eyes. Their efforts were aimed at one day joining the ranks of the full disciples. Looking further inward, on slightly elevated platforms, sat hundreds of figures dressed in pale yellow robes. Waves of powerful primordial energy radiated from them. These were the direct disciples, the elites of the Wild Hall. The honorary disciples watching from the outskirts looked at the direct disciples not just with envy, but also with a trace of awe. They knew very well that becoming a direct disciple of the Wild Hall was a mark of true strength. However, the most eye-catching sight in the entire plaza wasn't the many direct disciples. Instead, it was the 4 tall platforms in the innermost section. On each platform sat a single figure, calmly seated in silence. Their elevated positions above all the other disciples made their status clear to everyone, and no one questioned it. These 4 individuals were the Wild Hall's 4 direct disciples, the most outstanding talents among all the disciples of the Wild Hall. In front of the plaza, a row of stone chairs had been set up. Sitting on them were Chan Zhen, Wu Dao, and several protectors of the Wild Hall, all watching the grand spectacle unfolding before them. According to the latest reports, nearly 100 honorary disciples might be promoted to full disciples this time, Wu Dao said with a faint smile as he scanned the vast crowd. Qinzhen nodded slightly at this. That's a better number than in the past few months. It seems these youngsters have been quite diligent in their cultivation recently. Has Lin Dong appeared yet? Qinzhen suddenly asked. No, Wu Dao replied, smiling. He's probably in the middle of a crucial stage in his cultivation. Senior brother Mo seems to have taken an interest in him and is likely keeping an eye on him. If he doesn't make it in time, we can postpone the duel for another month. Cultivation is more important, Chunjin said with a light smile. He didn't particularly want Lin Dong to show up right now. With Lin Dong's talent, another month of training in the Wild Hall would give him a much better chance of defeating Jiang Hao. Word has spread, even among the honorary disciples. They've all heard of Lin Dong's reputation and want to witness the prowess of the newcomer who, after less than a month in the Wild Hall, dared to challenge one of the 4 direct disciples, Wu Dao said with a helpless chuckle. And knowing Lin Dong's personality, I doubt he'll back down. His personality is quite similar to senior brother Zhou Tong's. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stormed the Yuan sect alone. If he had stayed in the Dao sect, even the sect master would have protected him. But the Yuan sect, they're truly detestable. Chunjin sighed, and despite his status, he couldn't help but curse under his breath. Wu Dao remained silent, his expression darkening slightly. Clearly, he still held a deep grudge against the Yuan sect over Zhou Tong's fate. Enough, let's not dwell on that. Let's wait a little longer, Chunjin said, shaking his head. If senior brother Zhou Tong were still alive today, his achievements might have rivaled even the oldest and most powerful elders in the sect. Unfortunately, the head of the Yuan sect had sensed the threat Zhou Tong posed and had intervened personally. As Qian Zhan and Wu Dao conversed, a slight commotion began to ripple through the crowd as the time for the competition was being delayed. On one of the stone platforms, Jiang Hao gazed calmly at the sea of people below, frowning slightly. Lin Dong had reportedly been secluded in the martial arts hall for 5 days now. Could it be that he was trying to avoid this duel? Heh, senior brother Jiang Hao, it seems your duel today might fall through, Fang Yun said with a smile as he stretched lazily, glancing at the situation. If that's the case, all that earlier arrogance would be rather laughable, Jiang Hao said flatly. Lin Dong only recently joined our Wild Hall. Beating him wouldn't be much of an achievement, after all. He is still our junior, said Pang Tong, the most senior of the 4 direct disciples, frowning slightly. I don't intend to make things difficult for him, but a little respect for his seniors is necessary. Otherwise, the disciples from the other halls might mock us for not teaching our juniors proper respect, Jiang Hao said, curling his lips. Letting him take a small loss to rein in his temper might not be a bad idea, but go easy on him. Uncle Chen Zhan has taken quite a liking to Lin Dong, Song Zhou remarked with a smile. I know my limits. After all, for him to hold out during the Pill River baptism as long as he did, even I must give him some credit. Still, he's a newcomer and needs to learn the rules. Since none of you want to step up, I'll handle this, Jiang Hao replied indifferently. Song Zhou chuckled and nodded, not saying anything further. However, he found himself becoming increasingly interested in the upcoming duel. He was curious to see how this junior, who had risen through the ranks so rapidly upon joining the Wild Hall, would fare against one of the 4 direct disciples. Would Lin Dong be defeated and have his spirit crushed, or would he once again pull off something extraordinary? As time passed, anticipation built up among the disciples of the Wild Hall, and the murmur of excitement intensified in the crowd. Chun Zhan and Wu Dao noticed the growing restlessness and exchanged a brief glance, frowning slightly. However, they didn't intervene, though their gazes drifted toward the mountain peak where the martial arts hall was located. It's already this late. Where is Lin Dong? In a corner where several direct disciples were seated, Mo Ling and his companions were growing anxious. Their eyes scanned the area repeatedly. They were well aware of how widely the news of Lin Dong's duel with Jiang Hao had spread over the past few days. If Lin Dong didn't show up now, there would undoubtedly be whispers of doubt and ridicule. Lin Dong went to the martial arts hall. He's probably delayed by his training, Lu Bai murmured thoughtfully. Let's just wait a bit longer. There's nothing else we can do. Besides, delaying the duel might not be a bad thing. After all, Lin Dong's opponent is one of the 4 direct disciples this time. His words suggested that he wasn't particularly optimistic about the duel. While Lu Bai had confidence in Lin Dong, Jiang Hao is no ordinary opponent, certainly not someone like Tong Chuan. Hearing this, the others could only nod in agreement, suppressing their anxiety as they continued to wait for Lin Dong's arrival. The scorching midday sun had climbed to its peak, and seeing this, Chun Zhan and Wu Dao shook their heads in resignation. It seemed Lin Dong was still tied up in cultivation. "Let's begin the competition with the other disciples," Chun Zhan said, waving his hand. One of the Wild Hall's protectors stepped forward, sweeping his gaze across the plaza, about to announce the start of the competition. The sight of him caused a wave of disappointed murmurs to ripple through the crowd. Whoosh! But just as the murmurs began to fade, the sound of rushing wind suddenly echoed from the distant sky, accompanied by a familiar aura sweeping across the plaza. "So, he finally came. I knew he wouldn't let me down." Jiang Hao looked up toward the sky, a playful smile tugging at the corners of his lips as his gaze locked onto the approaching figure.